Good afternoon. Bonjour. I am pleased to be here to discuss the first of many audits on the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic that my office will conduct. Today, I also provided Parliament with our report on the Investing in Canada plan. There is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic was an all-hands-on-deck emergency the world over. Governments had to mobilize quickly to respond to the public health, social, and economic effects of this pandemic. Canada was no exception. Nous avons constaté que le gouvernement n'était pas aussi prêt qu'il aurait pu l'être pour affronter une pandémie de cette envergure. Malgré cela, la fonction publique s'est mobilisée. Elle a mis la priorité sur les besoins de la population canadienne et elle a livré rapidement soutien et services. Nous n'avons pas noté cette même mentalité axée sur le service et la coordination interministérielle pendant notre audit du plan Investir dans le Canada. C'est de cet audit que je vais vous parler en premier. Le plan Investir dans le Canada est important parce que le gouvernement investit 188 milliards de dollars pour stimuler la croissance économique à long terme, renforcer la résilience des collectivités, encourager la transition vers une économie verte et améliorer l'inclusion sociale et les résultats socio-économiques pour l'ensemble de la population canadienne. Infrastructure Canada n'est pas en mesure de présenter un portrait complet des résultats atteints et des progrès réalisés en lien avec le plan Investir dans le Canada. Nous avons constaté que les rapports préparés par le ministère excluent près de la moitié de l'investissement du gouvernement parce qu'ils ne tiennent pas compte de plus de 92 milliards de dollars engagés avant que le plan ne soit lancé en 2016. In addition, Infrastructure Canada's reporting captured only some programs each year, making it impossible to compare results year over year. The clarity of reporting was also impacted by inconsistent information received from federal partners in the plan. The absence of clear and complete reporting on the Investing in Canada plan makes it difficult for parliamentarians and Canadians to know whether progress is being made against the intended objectives. The issues affecting the Investing in Canada plan are not new. We have seen similar problems in the past audits in areas that require cross-departmental or cross-jurisdictional collaboration, such as Indigenous issues and climate change. This audit is yet another example of the need for the government to act on known issues. In this case, the need for broad collaboration and clear reporting on results for this large initiative. In contrast, we observed nimbleness during the audits of the government's COVID-19 response. Je vais parler d'abord de la prestation canadienne d'urgence. Le gouvernement voulait utiliser cette prestation pour fournir rapidement un soutien financier aux particuliers admissibles. Nous avons constaté que le ministère des Finances Canada, Emploi et Développement social Canada et l'Agence du revenu du Canada avaient relevé le défi et travaillé rapidement pour analyser, concevoir et verser la prestation canadienne d'urgence. Pour simplifier le processus et accélérer le versement des prestations aux particuliers, Emploi et Développement social Canada et l'Agence du revenu ont décidé de s'appuyer sur les attestations personnelles et sur les contrôles automatisés préalables au paiement pour valider l'admissibilité des demandeurs. Une fois la prestation lancée, le ministère et l'Agence ont introduit d'autres contrôles préalables au paiement pour limiter les abus éventuels. With the decision to rely on personal attestations, post-payment verification becomes very important. Employment and Social Development Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency are working to start their post-payment verification efforts relating to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit later this year. Their work in this area will be subject of a future audit. Turning now to the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We observed a similar focus on getting help out quickly, in this case, to businesses. Once again, the Department of Finance Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency worked together within short timeframes to support the development and implementation of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. The design and rollout of the subsidy highlighted pre-existing weaknesses in the agency's systems, approaches, and data. These weaknesses will need to be addressed to improve the robustness of Canada's tax system. Afin d'accorder la priorité au versement de la subvention, l'Agence a pris des décisions quant aux renseignements qu'elle demanderait et au contrôle qu'elle exercerait au préalable. Par exemple, l'Agence a décidé qu'elle ne demanderait pas aux employeurs de fournir le numéro d'assurance sociale de leurs employés, même si ce renseignement aurait pu l'aider à prévenir le dédoublement des demandes de soutien financier. Cette décision, de même que l'absence de données fiscales complètes et à jour, a limité la capacité de l'Agence à entreprendre les validations préalables au paiement, qui lui auraient permis d'évaluer efficacement les demandes de subvention. Je vais passer maintenant à notre dernière audit, qui a porté sur la préparation en cas de pandémie, la surveillance et les mesures de contrôle aux frontières. Nous avons constaté que l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada n'était pas aussi bien préparée qu'elle aurait pu l'être pour faire face à la pandémie de COVID-19. Les plans d'urgence et d'intervention n'étaient pas tous à jour ni testés, et les ententes d'échange de données avec les provinces et les territoires n'étaient pas finalisées. The Public Health Agency relied on a risk assessment tool that was untested and not designed to consider pandemic risk. The agency continued to assess the risk as low despite growing numbers of COVID-19 cases in Canada and worldwide. In addition, the Global Public Health Intelligence Network did not issue an alert about the virus that would become known as causing COVID-19. I am discouraged that the Public Health Agency did not address long-standing issues, some of which were raised repeatedly for more than 2 decades. These issues negatively affected the sharing of surveillance information between the agency and the provinces and territories during the pandemic. While the agency took steps to address some of these problems during the pandemic, it has much more work to do on its data sharing agreements and its information technology infrastructure to better support national disease surveillance in the future. We also found that the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency implemented restrictions at the border and quarantine measures. They provided guidance and tools to inform travelers and essential workers coming into the country of public health requirements. Toutefois, l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada n'avait pas envisagé ou planifié une quarantaine nationale, en commençant par la collecte d'informations auprès des voyageurs, jusqu'à toute la gamme des contrôles de conformité, y compris les suivis auprès des personnes signalées comme étant à risque de ne pas respecter la quarantaine. Par conséquent, l'Agence ne sait pas si la majorité des voyageurs ont bien respecté les mesures de quarantaine. Ces audits ont examiné des programmes qui ont été mis en œuvre à un temps record. En pleine pandémie, la fonction publique a mis l'accent sur le besoin présent, aider la population canadienne. In its first year, this pandemic has shown that when the public service must, the public service can. This crisis has highlighted the importance of dealing with known issues, whether it's agreeing on which organization has the lead, who will do what when, who will report what to whom, or replacing outdated systems or processes and addressing issues in data quality. These are not problems that you want to have to deal with at the same time that you are focusing on helping people, because this is not an efficient way of working, nor is it a productive way to serve Canadians. Government organizations need to do collaboration better. I am now ready to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Auditor General Karen Hogan will now take questions about these recent reports. La vérificatrice générale va répondre aux questions concernant les rapports rendus publics prochainement. We will do two questions, one question, one follow-up. Please identify your media outlet, alternating between the phone and the floor. We will go to the phone first. Does the operator have any questions?
Thank you. Merci. We will now take questions from the telephone line. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période de questions. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your device's keypad. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. Do not hesitate to press star 1 for any question.
No questions on the phone at this time. We will go to the floor.
We have one. Oh. I'm so sorry. The first question is from Raymond Filion, TVA. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, Mme Hogan. En parlant de l'Agence de la santé publique dans votre discours, vous avez dit en anglais que vous êtes découragé. Qu'est-ce qui vous décourage exactement?
Aborder les problèmes de longue date. Certains des problèmes que nous avons constatés dans notre audit ont été identifiés au préalable dans des audits en 2019, en 1999, excusez-moi, en 2002 et en 2008, ainsi que l'Agence avait tiré des leçons de crises sanitaires dans des années antérieures et ils n'ont pas réagi. Alors, je suis découragée qu'ils n'ont pas pris le temps entre une pandémie pour adresser les lacunes.
Quelles ont été les conséquences de ce manque de préparation selon vous? Est-ce que, par exemple, moins de gens, beaucoup moins de gens peut-être, seraient tombés malades autrement?
Ce que nous avons constaté dans notre audit, c'est que nous ne savons pas les conséquences de ne pas être aussi préparés. Nous avons constaté que l'Agence n'était pas aussi préparée qu'il aurait pu l'être et je mentionnerai 4 éléments clés très vite où ce que nous avons noté qu'ils pouvaient être plus préparés. Les plans d'urgence de santé n'étaient pas mis à jour, mais plus important, le plan provincial, fédéral et territorial d'intervention n'a pas été testé. La deuxième chose, c'était les lacunes dans le partage d'informations de santé, ainsi que les lacunes dans les systèmes d'infrastructures technologies pour supporter cet échange d'informations-là. Nous avons noté que l'outil d'évaluation de risque n'était non testé et n'était pas conçu pour considérer une pandémie. Et finalement, l'Agence n'avait pas envisagé ni planifié pour l'application d'une quarantaine à l'échelle nationale. Alors, on ne saurait pas si on aurait été mieux préparé si la réponse à travers le pays aurait été différente.
Operator, do we have another question on the phone?
We do. The next question is from Ryan Tumilty from National Post. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Yeah, you mentioned in your report on the pandemic preparedness that data sharing was a particular issue, one that you had highlighted in the past. I wonder how much of that problem you saw was generated by jurisdictional issues, with the provinces perhaps not wanting to meet federal rules or not particularly caring about trying to find a unified standard.
I think your question raises a very important issue that I think that we need to resolve across the country before another health crisis. As you noted, we had raised the issue of coming to an agreement and an understanding with the provinces and territories and the federal government on common elements to be shared when it came to data surveillance. We highlighted that in 3 previous audits. The department itself had identified that as an important lesson learned following the H1N1 and SARS health crisis. In fact, a Senate committee had also raised it. And it does stem from the fact that within our country, health is regulated provincially. And so in order to inform a unified, coherent response across the country, information like symptoms needs to be shared in order to adjust the response, especially in a virus as COVID-19, which is evolving and with the emergence of variants. So it really does become so important to have all of that upfront agreement work done before a crisis hits.
Yeah, and then just on another issue of that part of the report, you mentioned in the report on the quarantine that, you know, in the early months, large numbers of travelers weren't screened. It mentions in the report that the PHAC had never planned for a national quarantine. Do you think that's reasonable? Do you think that their targets and the numbers that they did achieve in terms of checking in on that mandatory quarantine, were they reasonable in the circumstances, or do you think they should have been better prepared to contact, you know, all travelers?
That's exactly one of the findings that we had in our audit, was that the agency had not planned for nor prepared for a nationwide quarantine of this scale. They did recognize that they had a capacity issue, and they looked for assistance from other federal organizations. They had set targets at the beginning to only contact a certain number of travelers, but then as the mandatory quarantine came in, they set their target at 100% of travelers being reached. What we did see, however, was that they did risk rank some of those, and those who they felt were at risk, a high risk of non-compliance, were in some cases, not all cases, referred to local law enforcement officers. However, again, here we saw that the agency did not follow up with those local law enforcement officers, and hence they were unable to demonstrate to us, or unable to know whether or not the quarantine was actually effective at limiting the spread of the virus.
We'll now take a question from the floor.
Hi there, Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Auditor General, I'm wondering, your report says that you'll be releasing a further report on the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, but you do say that you told the government of significant shortcomings and that you're expecting them to act on it. Can you give us any insight into those significant shortcomings? Can you sort of lift the veil a bit on what exactly you found so far?
So you are correct. Our intention was today to be tabling a report on the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. However, in order to make sure that we were able to actually provide some value and see some changes in the program, we wrote a letter to the Deputy Minister and advised him of some of the significant issues we found. And what we had seen was that their inspections were not following their own guidance, and hence they couldn't demonstrate to us that there was proper measures in place over the quarantine period for those workers. We wanted the department to take action and fix those situations, and hence why we are going to now go back and do more work on the 2021 Temporary Foreign Worker Program season, and be able to report our initial results and then our second stage of audit work in a report later on this year.
And in your opening remarks and in your reports, you point out specifically that the Public Health Agency continued to rank COVID-19 as low risk and only changed that to high risk, about 2 months in, a week after Italy was in a countrywide lockdown, days after a pandemic was declared on a worldwide scale. Was there an explanation for why it was continued to be ranked at a low risk, or do you have an understanding of why that happened? And was that ranking wrong?
So when we looked at the risk assessment tool that the agency used in the early stages of the pandemic, so in the first few months, we found that tool was in a pilot stage. It had not been fully tested or approved, and that the risk assessment tool was not designed to consider a pandemic, which is really looking at the forward-looking spread of a disease. And so, as such, for several repeated runs of the tool, the risk of the virus was assessed as low. I think this highlights the importance that any evidence-based analysis, any analysis done automated by a machine, requires a human judgment to be applied to it. And here's where we saw our Chief Medical Officer of Canada stepping in and saying that the risk rating needed to change based on her knowledge of what was going on in the country and around the world.
Operator, are there any questions on the phone?
We do. Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Bonjour. Merci. Madame Hogan, je voudrais parler des mesures de quarantaine à l'étranger. Vous semblez dire qu'il y en a beaucoup qui ont échappé à la supervision de l'Agence de la santé publique. Il y a même pendant 2 semaines, entre le 13 et le 25, des mesures qui n'étaient carrément pas appliquées. Je ne sais pas si on peut extrapoler ou si vous pouvez le faire pour moi, mais est-ce que ça veut dire que les pourcentages d'infections qu'on attribuait au voyage à l'étranger sont, de ce fait, forcément faussés?
Alors, dans notre audit, nous avons vraiment concentré sur la période au début de la pandémie, au mois de mars, avril, mai, dans ces régions-là, parce que la majorité des Canadiens qui avaient été demandés de retourner au pays allaient retourner dans cette période-là. Une fois que la quarantaine était obligatoire, nous avons vu que l'agence avait ciblé de contacter 100% des voyageurs qui avaient entré dans le pays. À cause des lacunes dans les informations recueillies des voyageurs, l'agence n'était pas en mesure de toujours rejoindre tout le monde. Ils n'ont pas d'informations et alors on ne sait pas si les individus ont bien respecté les exigences de la quarantaine et alors c'est impossible de déterminer si ça a contribué à la propagation du virus.
Donc, juste pour... parce que souvent, j'imagine que vous avez vu, mais quand il était question peut-être de resserrer la quarantaine, d'interdire les voyages non essentiels, le gouvernement brandissait en guise de preuve des pourcentages en disant, écoutez, juste 1% des cas, 2% des cas. Je veux dire, on ne peut pas vraiment se fier à ces chiffres-là, étant donné qu'il y en a tellement qui sont passés entre les mailles du filet, non?
Alors, ce que nous avons constaté dans notre audit, c'était que 2 tiers des voyageurs, l'agence ne pouvait pas confirmer que 2 tiers des voyageurs avaient bel et bien respecté les restrictions de la quarantaine. Et alors, je ne suis pas au courant des pourcentages que vous mentionnez, mais nous avons regardé les mesures et le suivi que l'agence a fait et ils ne sont pas en mesure de nous confirmer que la quarantaine a été effective.
We'll go now to another question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from David Aiken from Global News. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Auditor General. Hold on a second, just adjusting my audio here. I just wondered if I could get you, I think, just want to go over some things you were saying in French in your opening remarks to maybe repeat them a bit in English. The first is, I wonder if you just summarize for Canadians what you found, what your office found as it looked at the CERB and the Qs and how bureaucrats were able to roll that out. Could you give me your sort of top-level impression of those programs?
Oh, absolutely. What we saw in the wage subsidy program and the emergency response benefit for individuals is we saw the Department of Finance Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, and Employment and Social Development Canada really reacting in record time. They were able to design and roll out a program that, for many cases, especially in the wage subsidy, was never seen before in the country. They did while maybe not always a sound analysis at the beginning, a very sound analysis as the program rolled out. They prioritized the speed of getting support to individuals and businesses, and then made adjustments in real time based on some issues that arose. They were able to add some controls, and they were able to adjust the program to expand some inclusions. So it really was a service mindset focus on outcomes over process.
Thank you. And sort of similar for, if I could get you to repeat as well in sort of broader terms, when you looked at the travel aspect, the border control aspect from PHAC and from the CBSA, if you could summarize sort of the chief concerns that you found when you looked at that particular program.
Sure, I'll start off with one of the positives that we saw there. We did see the Canada Border Service Agency and the Public Health Agency of Canada working together in order to develop tools so that border service officers could have some guidance on how to apply exemptions and implement restrictions. However, what we found was that the Public Health Agency had not really planned for a quarantine across the nation. And hence they lacked some capacity and needed to get some assistance. They set targets in order to follow up with travelers, but had difficulty with gathering contact information and reaching many of those travelers. And hence they were unable to demonstrate that the majority of travelers had actually respected the quarantine.
Operator, if we could have a third question, please, from the phone.
Thank you. The next question, la prochaine question is from Tom Korski, Blacklock's reporter. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Thank you, Governor Hogan. On the Public Health Agency audit, you don't even mention the stockpile, the closure of warehouses, millions of pieces of PPE thrown away. On the CERB audit, you don't even mention that CRA had access to its electronic database of tax files so they could determine whether applicants indeed had a minimum $5,000 in taxable income the previous year. Would not have been an onerous or time-consuming check. Was it that your auditors didn't ask those questions, or they didn't get the answers, or what happened?
I think you had two questions there, and I'll try and address the first part, which was about personal protective equipment and the National Emergency stockpile. Both of those are subject of future audits. Unfortunately, pandemic preparedness is very broad, and we needed to be able to divide that subject matter in more digestible pieces. And so later on this year, we will be issuing a report on personal protective equipment and medical devices. When it comes to the income level in the wage subsidy program that you've asked about, what we had identified is that the audit highlighted some pre-existing conditions that were at the Canada Revenue Agency that hadn't been addressed. And some of that is the timeliness of tax information. In many instances, what we found was that employers had not either filed their 2019 GST returns, and hence it was very difficult in order to be able to do that comparison up front about what income would have been in the year before, or revenue would have been in the year before compared to this year. We saw the same issues in CERB, and so the priority was really put on the post-payment work. Hence why it's very important,
that's fine.
and we will go back and look at it.
I understand. My last question, in terms of the infrastructure audit, I don't understand the missing projects. Is it that the department gives you municipal addresses, but they're missing? or that they don't give you addresses, or that you don't ask for addresses. I don't understand how a subsidized infrastructure project is missing. Can you explain that?
So what we found in the Investing in Canada plan audit is that Infrastructure Canada was unable to give us a complete reporting of the progress that the government had made against its objectives in that plan. Part of that included it was hard to come up with a complete list of all the individual projects. And there was a reason why some of those projects were excluded. Some of it is because it was legacy projects that were not included in the design of the horizontal initiative that included many federal departments. But the other part was for privacy or security reasons. So at times, some of the infrastructure projects are shelters for abused individuals, and hence for security reasons, that information isn't made public. We were able to see those lists, but it is not something that's in the public domain.
We'll go now to questions from the floor.
Hi there, Marika Walsh again. I just wanted to go back to your comments on the temporary foreign workers program. When you say that there were no guidelines weren't followed in the inspections, so you can't figure out compliance, does that mean the temporary foreign workers were not kept safe?
So what we did is when we wrote to the minister about some of the weaknesses that we saw in his inspections, we wanted him to take action and improve the instructions that their inspectors were given. And so I do want to sort of respect the confidentiality of that information until we do table that report. We respect very much parliamentary privilege, and we want to make sure that we're able to disclose the full story in a meaningful way when we're able to re-examine the updates on the inspections in this upcoming temporary foreign worker season.
Just wondering though, if on the flip side, from a transparency and accountability side, if your decision not to disclose the shortcomings in full right now leaves temporary foreign workers at risk and not knowing the full picture of what they're walking into when they come to Canada.
This is exactly why we wrote to the Deputy Minister and outlined for him some of the weaknesses. I personally met with the Deputy Minister as well, emphasizing the importance to take action so that we can ensure the safety and security of the temporary foreign workers and also the growing season here in Canada. And so there is action taking. We have already started to re-engage with the department in order to begin our work for the upcoming season.
Going back now to the phone operator, please.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Glenn McGregor from CTV News. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Yeah, hi. Your report on PHAC refers to the SARS outbreak in 2003 and also H1 and N1. What sort of lessons should PHAC have taken from those things that they didn't act on and didn't inform their decisions in the COVID-19 case?
I think one of the most important lessons that the department acknowledged that it drew from SARS and H1N1 was the importance of having a common understanding with the provinces and territories on health information and how to share it and when it should be shared and what type of common elements should be included in there. As I mentioned previously, those were even findings that we had in a 1999 report and then repeated again in 2002 and 2008. And so while there was some work done on the information sharing agreements with the provinces, they were not finalized. What we did see, however, during the audit was that that didn't stop the provinces and territories and the federal government from sharing information. It just impacted the timely assessment of changes that might have been needed to the response nationwide.
Right. So you refer to the Global Public Health Information Network passing on links to news reports. I'm wondering, in contrast to what sort of information should they have had or data that they should have had that they could have shared that didn't get passed on?
So the Global Public Health Intelligence Network really issues two reports. It issues a daily report, which are links to news articles of medical concern across the world, and it also issues alerts. And so a daily report was issued at the end of December, which included a link to an article that would become the virus that causes COVID-19. But an alert was never issued. The criteria within the agency would have called for an alert to be issued in this instance. It's a virus that might have had a significant impact that was unusual. We saw that alerts were issued during H1 or prior to H1N1 and SARS and were credited at the time with informing the response in the country. But it's unclear why an alert was not issued. And here again, it's where the Chief Public Health Officer was key in the response in the country, in that she was able to provide an alert to her provincial counterparts following that daily report. But the fact still remains is that GFIN did not issue an alert as we believe it should have.
Taking now another question from the phone, please.
We do. Thank you. The next question, la prochaine question is from Chao Wong from Omni TV. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
At the end of the last year, Prime Minister promised that if Canadians made a good faith mistake when filing out the income eligibility for CERB, they were not to be punished. But today, you are telling us the CRA and Employment and Social Development Canada is working together. Will be some subject on the future audit. How do we translate this? It will be another like a post-payment verification will lead to payback or something like that. Can you explain this to us?
So in our audit on the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, our goal this time was to look at the design of the program, its rollout, and then any controls that were put in place before payment. What you're talking about is the work that will be subject of our follow-up audit. So we made a recommendation in our report to the agency in order to finalize its plan on post-payment work. That plan will need the information that will be collected during this upcoming tax season. So it's a very important tax season that's coming up for Canada Revenue Agency. And then they'll be able to finalize their plans and start that post-payment work. They expect to start doing that post-payment work in September of 2021. And it's our intention to give them a little bit of time to get that rolling. And then we will be going in to look at its effectiveness and whatever measures they have put in place to identify payments that might have been in error and recover them if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Oui, bonjour, Madame la vérificatrice. Vous constatez qu'on semble répéter les mêmes erreurs encore et encore d'une crise à l'autre. Est-ce que vous avez des indices qui vous permettent de croire que la prochaine fois sera différente? Est-ce qu'il y a des actions qui ont été prises pour donner un coup de barre, selon vous, ou vous avez l'impression qu'on est en voie de répéter les mêmes erreurs dans 10 ans, par exemple?
En effet, c'est un problématique que nous constatons dans plusieurs de nos audits. Souvent, le gouvernement prend du temps à réagir à des lacunes qu'ils connaissent. Nous avons vu vraiment une rapidité et une agilité durant la pandémie de réagir et de répondre. Mais maintenant, le travail qu'on doit faire après la pandémie est aussi important. C'est rare qu'on met une valeur sur la bonne préparation, mais il faut être bien préparé pour une crise. Et j'espère que à ce point-ci, le gouvernement reconnaît le besoin de prendre du temps entre des crises ou une urgence pour adresser les lacunes qui ont été identifiées, et dans ce cas-ci, durant plusieurs années et à plusieurs reprises. Et c'est important là, de prendre cette action-là.
Je veux revenir sur une question de ma collègue un petit peu plus tôt. Le gouvernement nous a dit que les voyageurs qui entrent au pays ne représentent pas une source importante d'infection. Mais si le gouvernement ne faisait pas le suivi comme il se doit et ne savait pas qui respectait la quarantaine ou pas, est-ce qu'on peut se fier au gouvernement quand il nous dit que les voyageurs qui entrent au pays ne représentaient pas une grande menace?
Alors, nous avons regardé aux voyageurs qui ont rentré, comme j'ai dit, au début de la pandémie. Et plusieurs mois ont écoulé depuis ce temps-là. Ce que nous avons constaté, c'est que l'agence n'était pas en mesure n'est pas en mesure de confirmer si la majorité des individus avaient respecté les restrictions de la quarantaine. Ça ne veut pas dire que les individus ne l'ont pas fait, mais le ministère n'a pas l'information. Depuis ce temps, nous avons regardé les mesures que l'agence a mises en place. Et alors, je ne peux pas commenter sur ce qu'ils nous disent en ce moment. Mais au début, ils ne faisaient pas un bon suivi.
Opérateur, nous allons passer à une autre question, s'il vous plaît, au téléphone.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Boris Trou, Le Devoir. Please go ahead, the line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Merci. J'aimerais vous entendre sur le rapport sur la subvention salariale. Vous avez mentionné en anglais dans votre discours d'ouverture des faiblesses de notre système d'impôt. J'aimerais que vous élaboriez un peu là-dessus. Qu'est-ce qui aurait pu être en place de différent qui aurait pu faciliter la mise en place d'un tel programme finalement?
Ah oui, dans notre audit sur la subvention salariale d'urgence du Canada, nous avons constaté que des faiblesses qui existaient déjà dans les systèmes à l'Agence de revenus du Canada sont venues à la lumière. Nous avons constaté des problématiques avec leur infrastructure technologique. Elle est désuète. Et il y avait des enjeux avec la collecte d'informations comme les numéros d'assurance sociale pour les particuliers pour aider à éviter des dédoublements de paiement. Il y a des manques de données dans le système et ça a vraiment identifié que beaucoup d'informations fiscales n'est pas à jour. Comme j'ai mentionné auparavant, plusieurs entreprises n'ont pas encore remis leur déclaration de TPS, qui est extrêmement important pour être en mesure de déterminer les revenus dans l'année précédente de la demande de subvention. Et alors, c'est vraiment plusieurs lacunes que nous avons constatées à l'agence.
Merci. En question suivie, vous avez répondu tout à l'heure à un collègue en anglais que c'est vraiment une saison d'impôts très importante pour l'ARC. Je voulais savoir, est-ce que, selon vous, là, le fédéral a vraiment une lourde tâche maintenant pour récupérer les sommes peut-être indûment encaissées par les entreprises canadiennes de prestations salariales d'urgence et peut-être aussi même par les individus en ce qui a trait à la PCU?
En effet, la décision de prioriser la rapidité d'un paiement avec des contrôles au préalable, mais de vraiment mettre la priorité sur les contrôles post-paiement, est une tâche qui va durer longtemps. En effet, l'Agence de revenus du Canada estime que c'est quelques années qu'ils vont être en train de vérifier si les paiements ont été faits en erreur et si un recouvrement est nécessaire. C'est pour ça que c'est important pour moi de retourner pour vérifier le plan et les mesures qui ont été mises en place pour identifier ces paiements erronés pour être en mesure d'ajuster la réponse si nécessaire, puisque c'est une réponse qui va prendre du temps et je doute être coûteux pour le gouvernement pour bien adresser.
Opérateur, comme il n'y a pas de questions dans la salle, nous allons continuer au téléphone.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Oui, bonjour. Juste un commentaire avant de poser ma question. Je rappelle qu'il faut alterner entre français et anglais là, pour les questions d'habitude. Pour Mme Hogan, donc vous avez dit au début de la conférence de presse au sujet là, de la gestion de la pandémie que vous étiez découragée. Mais moi, j'aimerais savoir comment est-ce que vous qualifiez l'attitude de l'Agence de la santé publique dans ces dernières années? Est-ce qu'on peut parler de procrastination? Est-ce qu'on peut parler d'insouciance? Comment expliquer comment est-ce que vous qualifiez finalement leur attitude par rapport à tous ces changements qui devaient être implantés?
Alors oui, en effet, je suis découragée que l'Agence n'a pas adressé des lacunes de longue date. quand on a plusieurs appels, plusieurs audits, nos propres leçons tirées, on devrait être en mesure d'adresser les problématiques avant qu'une crise arrive. C'est toujours mieux de les adresser avant que de les adresser durant. Ce que nous avons constaté durant la pandémie, c'est que les individus à l'agence ont travaillé très fort pour répondre à la pandémie et pour surmonter les défis, même s'ils n'avaient pas finalisé leur entente avec les provinces et les territoires, ils ont partagé de l'information, ils ont ajusté leurs demandes. Et alors, il y avait une bonne collaboration durant la pandémie. C'est que je pense que tous les Canadiens s'attendent qu'on travaille bien ensemble pour adresser la pandémie à l'échelle nationale.
Je pense que ma question, c'était plus à savoir comment est-ce que vous qualifiez leur attitude avant, là, parce que, bon, dans certains cas, ça faisait là, des dizaines d'années là, qu'on attendait finalement pour des changements. Mais j'ai aussi une question de suivi, en fait, parce que, bon, avec toutes vos recommandations, finalement, l'agence a accepté vos recommandations, elle dit qu'elle va y donner suite, mais dans certains cas, elle va y donner suite 2 ans après la fin de la pandémie. Là, ça nous amène déjà en 2023. Je me demandais, est-ce que c'est un délai qui est raisonnable, à votre avis, là, pour réparer certaines de ces lacunes?
Alors, je suis bien d'accord que l'agence a accepté toutes nos recommandations et des fois, j'aimerais une réponse plus rapide, mais je reconnais que ça fait au-dessus d'une année que nous sommes en train de gérer et répondre à une pandémie, qu'on a besoin que la pandémie vraiment se termine avant de l'adresser. Mais je les encourage de ne pas attendre pour adresser ça dans un délai de 2 ans. Je pense qu'une autre crise sanitaire peut venir. Je pense que n'importe quel individu canadien peut penser que c'est fort probable. Et alors, c'est vraiment le temps d'adresser les lacunes de longue date et de mieux se préparer à travers le pays.
Operator, we'll go to another question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Grant Robertson, the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Thank you. The findings on the risk assessments were quite stark. How much did you see the problems with GFIN feeding into the problems with the risk assessments? What sort of interplay did you find there?
So really, the Global Public Health Intelligence Network and the risk assessment are two different things. The Global Public Health Intelligence Network is supposed to monitor feeds across the world and provide either a link to interesting articles that individuals should pay attention to. Those are really domestic. And then the alerts are meant to signal something of significance that's unusual. And alerts are shared both domestically and internationally. And so those alerts really help inform a response that might happen even outside of our country. The risk assessments are things that happened once the federal, provincial, and territorial response plan was really activated at the beginning of January. And they're supposed to adjust the Government of Canada's response domestically. And so the fact that the tool did not consider the risk of a pandemic or the particularities of a pandemic and remained at low is concerning. And that's why it's important to note that the Chief Public Health Officer reacted, and she was able to tell them that low rating in this tool wasn't right, and that the response needed to be changed.
You had pointed out that there were no alerts as the outbreak progressed and got worse. It's my understanding that in some functions, GFIN helps inform some of this process as the outbreak progresses. Did you find any links there in the non-alerts as the outbreak was progressively getting worse?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, the Global Public Health Intelligence Network issues 2 reports. The first is that daily report, and at the end of December, it did include the link to an article about a virus that would become known as the virus that caused COVID-19. It's following that daily report that the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada actually communicated with her provincial counterparts and said, we need to talk about this. They issued a warning. She issued a warning to them through an email saying we need to respond to this. And so the alert really is meant to trigger, a notification about an unusual event. I guess if I could, equate it to something that everyone would understand, I have a smoke detector in my home, and I trust that when I'm in my home that it will go off to give me a warning to go inspect and see what's going on and then react as needed. And that's the intention of alert, was to alert both domestically and internationally something of concern, something that was unusual, something outside of a daily report, and something that we saw issued in the past during H1N1 and SARS.
Operator, do we have
Okay, thank you.
Do we have another question on the phone?
Yes, the next question is from Murray Brewster from CBC News. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Good afternoon, Auditor General. Thank you very much for taking our questions. I wanted to follow up on something that the line of question that Grant had. So do you believe that the Public Health Agency of Canada has a clear grasp or had a clear grasp of the importance of early warning and early warning pandemic intelligence based upon everything you've seen?
What we saw during our audit was that often there were tools like the risk assessment tool or the Global Public Health Intelligence Network that were not working as intended or as they should have worked. But we did see that the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada reacted in both those instances. So she saw the daily report, even though an alert had not yet been issued, and communicated with her provincial counterparts. She put into question the continuous low risk assessment that was being generated from a tool that was not designed to deal with pandemics, and requested that the rating be raised. And so it just highlights how data and artificial intelligence are important, but human judgment is needed to help inform a response when it comes to a crisis, and especially in this case, this health crisis.
And just as a follow-up to that, can you give your assessment as to whether or not you think going forward the federal government should focus on having a better pandemic early warning system, one that incorporates all facets of intelligence?
I think that the federal government needs to sit back and decide what it wants the Global Public Health Intelligence Network to do. They need to clearly identify what its purpose is and the reports that it might generate. They need to then clearly communicate that so individuals know when to signal an alert and when to use it. And then they need to use it as intended. So the agency has criteria now about when an alert should be issued, and it's unknown why one didn't happen. So further investigation into this network should be to confirm what it's meant to be used for and then use it as it should be.
Operator, do we have other questions on the phone, please?
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Jordan Tress from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Good afternoon, Auditor General. I'm curious just on one particular thing. In your audits about the CERB and the wage subsidy, you mentioned that there is going to be obviously a costly path forward in trying to recoup some of these wrongful payments. I'm wondering just how costly they might be. Is there a dollar figure that you can provide us that your audit team was able to come up with?
So throughout our audits, as I mentioned, we really looked in both the wage subsidy and the emergency support payment at the design and the rollout. The departments, the agencies, and the department are still in the process of finalizing what those post-payment or post-audit plans will look like. So we did not sample files and test payments that might have been paid in error. That will all be subject of a second audit on both of those programs in the coming years.
And just as my second question, you talk a lot about how there were issues that were identified in previous audits that obviously were not addressed prior to this pandemic. I'm wondering, looking forward, can you give us your sense of just how confident you are that the shortcomings that you have seen through these audits, the shortcomings in previous audits, that the government will actually start to address these things so that when the next crisis rolls around, we are actually prepared for it, and Canadians can feel confident that we're prepared to manage it?
As I mentioned, I am discouraged that issues were raised in some cases for a couple of decades without being addressed. And I have every intention of continuing to apply pressure to the Public Health Agency to address some of these. I think every department and agency that we audit, if they're going to agree to our recommendations and learn and grow from even their own lessons learned, they need to take action. And what we saw is that it's not really efficient to do it in the middle of the crisis. And so we really do need to take advantage of that downtime and somehow find a value to put on being prepared and prevention instead of only on reacting to a crisis. So time will tell, but I will absolutely be staying focused and looking at the Public Health Agency and the actions they'll take going forward.
Opérateur, la prochaine question au téléphone, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. There are no more questions on the phone. Il n'y a plus de questions sur le téléphone.
We'll take a question from the floor.
Sorry, I didn't want to stomp on my colleagues on the phone, but since there's time, I just wanted to go back to the temporary foreign workers issue. I'm just a bit confused as to why you wouldn't release the concerning information in advance of another season rather than keeping that concerning information sort of under lock and key when there are people who are at the center of this making choices to come to Canada or not to come to Canada in the third wave of pandemic.
So we shared that information with the Deputy Minister, which is exactly the individual who needs to have that information in order to effect a change and have a positive impact on the temporary foreign worker program. We've engaged with him very regularly and have many dialogues. We shared the information, what we could with him in a letter and in discussions with him, and all of it will be shared when we are able to table our report in Parliament closer to the end of this coming year.
The people who have the lives at stake are not the Deputy Minister, they're the people who are coming to Canada. So are you just taking the government at its word that even though it hasn't acted on recommendations for the last 20 years, it will act on recommendations in February? And were temporary foreign workers safe in the last year in Canada during these pandemic protocols?
The responsibility to provide a safe place for temporary foreign workers rests with the farmers. The department's responsibility is to inspect and make sure that they are complying with the health regulations. And so I have already seen the department taking some action in response to the letter and the discussions that I have had with them. And as I mentioned, we will follow up and have already started that work, and we'll be making all of that information public as soon as we're done our audit work.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the time we have today. Merci beaucoup.